The writing in Mob Psycho 100 is stellar. Now, similarly to One Punch Man, the thing about it that stood out to most people in its promotional material and early episodes was the animation, which, make no mistake, is for both series legitimately some of the very best this medium has to offer. But as Mob Psycho progressed from week to week, I was consistently floored by how amazing its writing is. And really, that shouldn't be too surprising when we consider the nature of the source material. For those who somehow missed out on the trivia when One Punch Man was at its peak, Mangaka 1 got his start posting his manga online, starting with One Punch Man in 2009 on his own website, and beginning Mob Psycho in 2012 with it being serialized in Ura Sunday. The first thing that you'll notice about these is that his artwork is rough. Beyond the point of being sketchy and harsh in a stylized manner, his artwork bears the mark of someone who just isn't that great with a pencil or drawing stylus. Now I must be clear that this style still works quite well for his stories, and he has improved a good deal, but in light of this poor artwork, we should examine his writing when looking for why he became the sensation that he did, with his website and its poorly drawn manga garnering over 100,000 hits a day as of last year, and Mob Psycho getting serialized by a site whose series by and large have pretty good and professional looking artwork. One is fantastic at creating simple yet evocative concepts that play with the audience's expectations, often by making the extraordinary into something mundane. Saitama is unequivocally the most powerful hero in existence, and yet he pursues it as a simple hobby. He's a hero for fun. What has gaining this unrivaled power given him? Nothing much but boredom bordering on depression and the occasional existential crisis. Mob is a boy with the very rare gift of psychic powers, and very powerful ones at that, who has been totally disenfranchised to the idea of them, seeing them as something of little value, and entirely disregarding them as worthwhile while he glorifies those normal aspirations like athleticism and good looks. Both of these protagonists and their attitudes instantly evoke the question of why. Why do they hold these outlooks on life? And in both of these series, one provides compelling ideas that answer that question. Infinite, unrivaled power will quickly become dull and uninteresting. In the mind of an adolescent, priorities and perceptions of what does and does not matter are easily warped and seem silly to those of us on the outside looking back. Incidentally, what I've identified as some of these series' central ideas may also be why some felt that One Punch Man got a bit stale. I, for one, enjoyed it the whole way through for its godly fight animation and the comedy that really clicked with me, but even someone who enjoyed it enough to give it a strong score like Digibro recognized a few flaws, saying that it explores that main idea in about as much depth as it can in its first episode, and has few compelling ideas outside of it. We can look at Mob Psycho's theme as I've interpreted it, and see why it provides the groundwork for something even more compelling and rich with ideas. Mob Psycho explores the broad but heavily commented upon topic of adolescence. Specifically, the experience of many teens of feeling somehow lost, out of place, or undervalued by a complex and largely uncaring world is one that the series uses the various psychologies of its various characters in order to explore from a number of different angles and perspectives. And one part of that last sentence was key: psychologies. In One Punch Man, we get to see Saitama's psyche explored in relative depth, but for nearly all of the other characters, as fun and endearing as many of their attitudes and motivations are, they are pretty simple and one-sided. Even in those instances where they're pretty wordy, they're at least quite cliched. And that's completely fine. It's better than fine, in fact, because that's a big part of the point. To effectively lampoon the silly motivations of many characters in fighting shonens, its own characters also have them, and One Punch Man goes out of its way to paint them as what they truly are: silly, shallow, and ultimately pointless. If anything, Mob Psycho's deft handling of its writing shows that one is absolutely capable in that regard, and he wrote One Punch Man's characters that way because that was what worked best for that series, not out of a lack of an ability to somehow do better. Building a cast of characters with well fleshed out and understandable psychologies is a key part of what I believe to be the greatest strength of Mob Psycho's writing. How well the series transitions from one take on its ideas to the next, by making each character's psychology and attitudes build off of those of the people around them. The writing in this series is incredibly tight in this regard, with each thing it introduces serving a specific purpose and adding a new perspective to ideas that have already been brought up. This focus on its characters' psychologies and how they relate to each other ends up differentiating Mob Psycho 100 from a lot of other series tackling similar thematic subject matter. Unlike many series that tell of the struggles of adolescence and lament the state of a world that creates those struggles, Mob Psycho is not petty. Breaking a dominant trend, the series focuses not on institutions or organizations, but individuals. It examines its characters' mindsets and points out without hesitation what their flaws are. Mob Psycho feels much less petty because it isn't lashing out at society. It's criticizing flawed worldviews and attitudes. In almost any other series, the bodybuilding club would be antagonistic, or at least resented to some degree. They have what everyone desires but few possess. They have what a given author likely wanted if they're complaining about life as an adolescent. They have what most of the readers likely want if they are identifying with a world about the struggles of adolescence. And yet, one does not fault or demean them for being athletic, or resentfully assume that a proficiency of the body must come with a deficiency of one's character. The members of the bodybuilding club are fantastic people. They are gracious enough to let Tomei and her gang continue to hang out in the room and goof off, and legitimately passionate enough about their club activity to welcome Mob and his earnest desire for self-improvement with open arms, taking no issue with the fact that he's starting from virtually square zero. They value fitness deeply, as evidenced by how impressed by the glory of muscle they always are, but they do not see a lack of that as devaluing someone on a personal level, as evidenced by their willingness to take in Mob and their charity towards Tomei in spite of her laziness being pretty much the antithesis of their own values. In addition to being an incredibly gratifying inversion of this trend of pettiness, the bodybuilding club serves an even further purpose in Mob Psycho by being a contrast for Teruki. Teruki is someone who is largely characterized by the great value he places upon his defining feature. Not his muscles, but his psychic abilities. The only difference being that his mindset towards this is that it makes him superior to everyone else, instead of simply different from them. Also note how his other trait that is somewhat standout, his good looks, are stripped away from him by Mob, so both aspects of himself that he used to boost his ego are revealed to be shallow, fleeting, and inconsequential when determining someone's value as a person. Once again, it is an individual's delusions, not some institution or societal force, that instilled his master race ideology that is the antagonistic force here. And Mob Psycho doesn't simply paint him as a villain because, of course, this type of thinking is wrong, expecting us to buy into that moral stance at face value. It immediately demonstrates the harm that this mindset can cause, not just for others, but for those who maintain it as well. For as soon as you begin to attach your value as a person to your superiority to others in a given regard, you open yourself up to a huge personal blow when someone comes along who is superior to you in that regard. Mob is, in spite of his relative apathy, able to weather Teruki's psychic assault largely unscathed, demonstrating himself to be not simply superior to Teruki in terms of psychic ability, but vastly superior. And this is accompanied by Mob's constant belittlement of psychic power overall throughout much of their fight. It is absolutely crushing for Teruki to have someone who sees what he has built his own identity around excelling at, effortlessly and unquestionably outclassing him to a significant degree in that field, while demonstrating an emphatic dismissiveness towards the idea that it has any value. While the fact that Teruki can do damage to Mob with his bare hands should cast Mob as weak on some level, it really only belittles Teruki further, by showing that his muscles can do what his powers could not, when he gleefully swatted aside those who valued muscles only moments before, secure in his belief that his psychic powers could do everything. Even if he was only able to do any of that because of Mob's restraint, it is just a further blow to a worldview that Teruki had defined himself by and that had already been thoroughly shattered. Teruki's worldview also serves an even further purpose in Mob Psycho by being a contrast for Mob's outlook. Where Teruki's great failing is in tying his value and people's in general to the possession of powerful psychic abilities, the source of much of Mob's unhappiness in his life is his failure to see his psychic abilities as having any value whatsoever, and as a result having a very low sense of self-worth. This is a very common issue, especially for younger people. For those of us who aren't as blinded by ego as Teruki is, or as content with our strong traits as the members of the Body Improvement Club are, there is a strong tendency to see our own talents as mundane and unimpressive. And not without reason. For many, the fact that they can do something makes it less impressive, with the inverse also being true. Of course the ability to do that which we cannot is impressive. Those who can are simply better than us at it. Mob's little brother, Ritsu, also fits into one's exploration of how we view our talents extremely well. He is someone who wants a talent, one specific ability, with extreme desire. Mob settles on becoming fit, but what he admires and aspires to is really just those traits that society glorifies in general. Good looks, athleticism, and good grades. So his relation to that pursuit is fundamentally different from Ritsu's desire, his rabid hunger for psychic abilities. It's not that he specifically devalues his numerous gifts. Rather, nothing in the world is of any worth to him aside from these abilities. Similarly to Teruki, who also held up psychic powers as the only thing really worthwhile, Ritsu is in the highly precarious position of focusing his entire world around this one thing, meaning that it is vulnerable to destruction should that one thing fail him, and like Mob, he misses out on the value of all those things he does have. Seeing as I've been asserting this constantly, I should back up and defend my statement that the psychologies of Mob Psycho's characters are well established. First up, the Body Improvement Club. These guys are by far the most well-adjusted kids in the show, and the reasons for that, their loving pursuit of a passion without demeaning those who don't share it, shows us what everyone else is doing wrong. Mob realized as a child that his abilities couldn't gain him what he wanted, in his case the attention and admiration of Tsubomi, so he ended up taking her dismissiveness towards them and making it his own as well. As with nearly every little observation about this series it seems, this tidbit also reveals another idea posited by one. Aspiring after abilities or talents primarily for what they will win us, be that fame, admiration, or wealth, is a grave mistake, because in most instances, that will lead us to disregard our greatest aptitudes and instead pursue something that we may not be as well suited for, and may not even enjoy pursuing for that reward. Ritsu is a really interesting character because while he is ostensibly that role model older brother type figure for Mob, appearing older and more mature and generally excelling in most areas that a person would want to, it is Mob who is his older brother, and the one that he is chasing after, even as Mob displays admiration for him. It's an ingenious little role reversal that also has a really defining impact on his psyche. As you'd expect many youth to be, he was captivated by his older brother's powers, and by the idea that naturally he too would get them when he grew up. He idolizes them even more fanatically as a result of being saved, kind of, by Mob when being harassed by a group of delinquents and witnessing the unrestrained power that Mob possesses. The fact that he seems to lack these powers fills him with a huge amount of frustration, rage, and some kind of feeling of betrayal and ultimately fear and resentment, carefully hidden by a meticulously constructed facade of devoted brotherly love. Teruki's backstory is a bit less unique, but still very effective. He is a personification of that deep-seated insecurity many experience about being completely average and lacking any particular value as individuals whatsoever. He spends the entire fight with Mob desperately insisting that his powers make him a superior being, that everyone else is average and second-rate, which is why Mob's existence presents such a threat to him. His possession of psychic powers allows him to highlight a common coping mechanism, latching onto one specific thing and tying people's value to that, which again nicely contrasts with Mob's equally harmful rejection of that thing in its entirety. With the introduction and exploration of the antagonists for the end of the series, Mob Psycho really proves to me that the rejection of those bitter feelings of jadedness that I pointed out earlier was completely intentional. The upper echelon of Claw is made up of a bunch of Terukis that never got sense knocked into them. The master race ideology fueled by victim complexes, the vain focuses by them on maintaining their own cool aesthetic style, it's all there. The fragility of that worldview should someone more powerful than you present themselves, rendering you by the logic of your own ideology as below them, is evidenced by the constant bickering and infighting among the top members, all desperate to assert their own superiority to their peers. There's not a whole lot more to them. People have accurately characterized Mob Psycho as being a bit front-loaded with its themes and ideas. But because they are so compelling and well conveyed, they warrant the unpacking and fleshing out this extra material provides. And of course, the best instance of that is the thematic input that our Lord and Savior S-tier husbando Reagan is able to provide. In a series dominated by children and children of the mind, here is a true adult to offer his perspective. Not a saint, not an ideal, but a genuine human being. He is able to weigh in with a level head and a collection of worldly knowledge to reveal to each of these characters where the blind spot that is impeding their personal growth is. As a child, the burden of being forced to fight every battle can be too great, and it is okay for Mob to allow Reagan to handle that for him. There are just some battles that he shouldn't be waging. To people scorning society or the world, he points out that any reality apart from that is a fantasy of their own creation, that any perception of themselves as special, higher beings is nonsense, and that they must go engage with that real world and make their way in it. They are really people just like Mob, lonely and wishing to be popular, but without the guidance of positive influences like Reagan and Ritsu, leading them to see personal self-improvement as the path to remedying this. They believe that they must reshape society to center around and worship their talent and give them the recognition they deserve, instead of reshaping themselves. We circle around to class president Shinji Kamuro with this one. He couldn't excel to the degree that his older brother had, and so he attempted to reshape the society of his school to one that would exalt him and his abilities. With this, we are shown the implications of Claw's worldview on a smaller scale. Innocent people become victims of an ideology that by necessity classifies some as lesser in order to further glorify the elite class. It expands, becoming more and more exclusionary, until people who were initially relieved by having the feeling that scum was being weeded out of their society themselves become targets of this denigration, with the elites becoming a smaller and more select group, until they garner enough ill will that the system is ready to collapse when one pillar of it gives under the pressure. It's incredible how you can run in analytical circles like this while thinking about Mob Psycho, each character and idea feeding smoothly into the next. Overall, Mob Psycho has remarkably tight writing that connects every character to each other in order to create this focused thematic through-line that, using those characters as different lenses, is able to explore a myriad of manifestations and implications of that theme. The intersection between volume of ideas and relevancy of each of those ideas to each other and the larger themes of the work as a whole in Mob Psycho 100 is astounding, and I hope that my exploration of a piece of that here has revealed to you just how great a writer one truly is.